Hello everyone, this is Max from the Edemos Max podcast and YouTube channel. Well, it's certainly been a minute since the last time we've had a podcast episode. Nonetheless, we're here. And this time I wanted to give a little bit different type of content. Usually I do more of a monologue or dialogue, whether it's impromptu or scripted. But this time I have a pre-recorded talk that I gave about 2 or 3 weeks ago titled Living Liturgically in the 21st Century. Now, I don't want to explain too much about what that means right now. You can kind of guess just by the title. I'd rather let the talk do the talking. And I did this talk at Theology on Tap, which is basically, it's a Catholic speaking event that's usually had at bars or restaurants where a parish will bring in a speaker, theologian, philosopher, just anyone that can speak on a certain subject. And they speak on that subject, and it's typically related to theology and philosophy, hence the name. But yeah, it was a really great experience, and before we get into that talk, I just want to give a big thanks to the St. Sebastian's Parish for hosting me, as well as John Joyce, who was the host of this event. So thank you to him, as well as everyone that showed up and made it possible to put on this event. But without further ado, let's get into this talk. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments, or you can contact me. If you look in the description, I'll leave my email. You can contact me and ask any questions or leave any comments or points of criticism. Anything is accepted. But anyways, thank you, and just enjoy this talk.
Hey! Alright, cool. You stink! Shut up. Alright, well, I'd like to welcome you all to, what number installment is this?
Like 7 or 8.
7 or 8th installment. We're going to lose count at some point. The 7 or 8th installment of St. Sebastian's Theology on Tap. I'm happy with the turnout we have tonight. Lots of familiar faces, but lots of new faces as well. That's always good to see. Our speaker for tonight is Max Eli Kelbley, who is a speaker known to many of you, but maybe not known to some of you. He's going to be talking tonight about, the title of his talk is Living Liturgically in the 21st Century. I'll let him explain what that's about. I will also let him further introduce himself. And so with that, no, I forgot. I should remind everybody of the format. So we have a 30-minute talk, followed by a 15-minute intermission. You can go get drinks, food, go to the bathroom, talk, whatever you want to do. And then we'll have another 45-minute slot for Q&A, but really the Q&A can go as long as you have questions for. We have the place until 10. I do ask that you try to get out before 10 because the place actually closes at 10. So we don't want to stay past close. We want to be good guests and not overstay our welcome. But anyway, with that, I will hand the mic off to Max. So let's give him a round of applause.
Let's start in a prayer. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord and author of all creation, the seasons of the year and time itself are at thy command. In thy goodness, bless this evening, bless this weekend, safeguard our nation, bless this faith community with peace, and save us through the prayers of the Mother of God. Amen. So, usually this part of the talk is where someone gives qualifications qualifications for why they're fit to talk about this subject. And actually, part of what qualifies me to talk about this is that I don't have qualifications formally. So, the topic is living liturgically in the 21st century. And so, the way I can introduce this is with a story. So back in January 2021, right after I graduated college at Walsh University, I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do. So I traveled to Albania by myself for 2.5 weeks, and I very quickly found out that the sort of ideals I had in my head of what I wanted were very much not my own. Like from a very young age, I grew up close to nature, loving building with Legos and stuff like that. But in college, I really got into my head that I wanted to have like this this awesome career traveling abroad. But on this trip, I realized that, or I started asking myself questions about like, what is community, and what is this faith that I have, and so. The reason I mentioned that I grew up living close to nature was very important. Is very important for this topic, because liturgy and nature are very close and actually intimately connected to each other. And when I came back from this trip, I also, instead of wanting to work in the embassy or CIA, I had a very strong change of heart and wanted to become a carpenter. And I'm now a carpenter and roofer, which is also important for this topic, which I'll get into why. Roofing and carpentry, it doesn't seem like has anything to do with the liturgy. It has the seasonal work has everything to do with it, and I'll explain that as we go through. So, liturgical living, I don't know exactly if the phrase itself is modern or not, but the concept is definitely, it's essentially existed for all time. And it's kind of hard to define, and I as I give this talk, I'm still thinking through this, of what exactly it is. And the way that I see liturgical living is that it's when, for Catholics, it's when we make the Mass the center of our lives. In other words, to say we make Christ the center of our lives, and everything in our lives, no matter what we do, whether it's mundane work or whatever it is, it should that should be filled with Christ by how we attend to it. And a lot of what I want to talk about is attention. Attention is one of the most important things of all things, because what we, there's the saying that you are what you eat. That's a very true statement, and the reason that's a true statement is because what you take into yourself is what you become. So if you eat like really good healthy food, you'll become healthy and strong. If you eat really bad food, you will be very unhealthy. And if you eat something that's completely inedible or toxic, you're gonna die. So it's the same way with attention. What you pay attention to and what you participate in is what you become. And because that is at the heart of what liturgy is for the human person, living liturgically actually isn't restricted to quote-unquote religious people. And actually, I would say that the secular world is doing a much better job than a lot of Catholics, myself included, are doing today. And all you have to do is look around in our culture and see how people are acting in the absence of religion, in the absence of liturgy, or going to church, or like a very reverent liturgy. You see people making things like sports and especially like concerts, their religion and their liturgy. Like they're singing, they're dancing, they put on their priestly garb, their jerseys, and get ready for the game and all this stuff. It's religious. Like there's no other way to describe it. Parades, protests, like zombie walks, Comic-Con. These are all religious events. So that's very important to understand that. And understanding that, that a lack in liturgical living in the Catholic sense has kind of opened us up for that secular form of liturgy. I think that's also important as well. And living liturgically is part of the practice which informs theology. I don't really know much about like formal theology like Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, Duns Scotus, but there's a really good quote that St. Maximus the Confessor has, which is, "Theology without practice is the theology of demons." So if we just think about things, if we just ruminate on things and just ponder ideas, that's good. But if it's not grounded in actual reality, like an incarnational reality that's part of participating in reality, and if it doesn't have that aspect, the devil's going to take over eventually. So the theme of attention is actually all throughout the Bible. Like it's not put in the term of attention, but it's often put in terms of vigilance in different parts. So, like in 1 Peter, like if you pray compline, you'll definitely recognize this from 1 Peter. Be sober and watch, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, goeth about seeking whom he may devour. And then St. Paul in his letter to the Colossians says, be instant in prayer, watching in it with thanksgiving, praying with all for us also, that God may open up unto us a door of speech, to speak the mystery of Christ, for which also I am bound, that I may make it manifest as I ought to speak. Walk with wisdom towards them that are without, redeeming time. Now, that's another very important part of liturgical living, is redeeming time. So with that, I want to go into the first subject, which is reimagining time. So the modern definition of time, it's really strange. It's a really strange idea about time, and because the way that we experience time and the way that we think about time are two completely different things, and it's very incoherent. The way that we think about time is that we think about time as being linear. We think about like a square calendar, and there's points on a calendar, and once an event happens, it's done, it's never going to happen again, and you're never returning to it. However, that's not how we experience time. If we experience time linearly, that would mean that every single day of the week would have a different name, but it doesn't. We have 7 days in the week, and obviously Genesis tells us that 7 days of the week, and there is a convenience aspect to that, because you can't just have a new name for every single day of the week. But also, that's, like I said, that's not how we experience time. So the way that we engage with time is actually similar to how we engage with space. So just how we might return to work, or we might go and return to work, we do so in the same way in time. So we return to work in the morning, we return home in the evening, and the evening comes every evening, the morning comes every morning. Monday happens every Monday. 7 days from now is going to be Friday. 7 days ago was Friday. So understanding that time isn't linear, but it's actually cyclical is very important. And that's how the ancient and medieval Christians intuitively understood it. Not only them, but all of civilization, or all of human culture throughout the world has understood time as being cyclical. And you'll see sometimes some Christian and Catholic theologians say that you can't find any basis in the Bible or in tradition of cyclical time. And that's absolutely nonsense. Because just look at the Middle Ages, or even further back, in Roman times of Christendom, and look at how they represented their calendars. They didn't put a square thing and tack up to the wall. They represented them like a circle. So that's just to get you thinking a little bit about how time is cyclical. And another example of that could be Christmas. When we experience Christmas, it's not just this one event that we had in our lives. It's not just one Christmas, we're done, that's it. When we enter into Christmas, there are certain feelings that everyone has that are just unexplainable, that you can't just induce any other time of the year. And intuitively, we have these very rightful but adverse reactions to when people are trying to celebrate Christmas, in July or something. It just feels unnatural, and you just can't induce those feelings and those certain memories at those times. It's something you can only engage in when you return to that part of the cycle. So, since we experience time cyclically, and we can visualize it as a circle, there are symbols that represent this as well. So in the West, we have in medieval times, you would see something called the Wheel of Fortune, not the game show, but like the Wheel of Fortune. It's like it's a wheel, and it has different phases of a person's life, and like it starts good or wealthy, and then they lose all their wealth, and then they're in despair, and then they start to gain it back, and then come back in the cycle, and it's just over and over. That's the Wheel of Fortune. Other symbols include like a snake eating its tail. That's found in so many different religions, including Christianity as well. Snake wrapped around a tree, cyclical time. So I think a good way to encapsulate that is just to quote the beginning of the book of Ecclesiastes, which deals with the whole theme of the book of Ecclesiastes is cyclical time. So, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man of all his labor which he makes under the sun? One generation passes away, and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to its place where it rose. The wind goes towards the south, and turns about unto the north. It whirls about continually, and the wind returns again according to its servant. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. And to the place from where the rivers come, they return again. All things are full of weariness, man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that has been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. So with that, I wanted to transition into the second subject, which is calendars in the cosmos, or calendars in nature. As I mentioned briefly in the introduction, the liturgical calendar, whether you follow the new calendar, the old calendar, Byzantine calendar, it doesn't so much matter because it's still this still applies to some extent, and which is that the liturgical calendar in its natural cycles of Earth, which is to say the seasons, where the stars are positioned, those are intimately connected and inseparable. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. And specifically, the calendar is directly related to the life of Christ, and that should be obvious. Like the biggest feast of the year, Easter, Christmas, then everything else, Blessed Virgin Mary, and then the saints, so on and so forth. So, yeah. And because these are intimately connected, we should be extraordinarily cautious of changing feasts, moving them around, and just arbitrarily placing them here or there, because we do know to an extent how these are connected, but for the most part, we haven't even reached the surface level of the depths of how the why these are connected, and so deeply so. But I'll give you some examples on the surface level as far as we can get into. And so, for example, Christmas. Christmas is placed specifically right near the winter solstice. The winter solstice is December 20th, 21st. What that means is that, well, the winter solstice is, for all intents and purposes, the darkest day of the year. It's the day with the fewest daylight. And that is very symbolically important because, not that it's on the winter solstice, but that it's a few days after, because when Christ was born into the world, some had inklings of that Christ had come, but for the most part, the world was totally unaware that, the King of the universe, the Savior of everyone, was born into the world. It was hidden, just as the beginning of the growing days is hidden right after the winter solstice. Because if the winter solstice is the darkest day of the year, that means that every day after it, the light gets a little bit brighter, and a little bit brighter. And that's why, it's there's some really awesome symbolism as well with Epiphany, which is a few days after Christmas, when the day is slightly noticeably longer. And that's when, and Epiphany celebrates when Christ, the divine Logos, is revealed into the world, when he's already in the world, but he is exposed. His light can shine, begin to fill the world. And there's a lot of examples of this, of how the seasons really matter with the feast days and everything. And especially, so another example directly connected with Christmas is the Annunciation. The Annunciation is 9 months prior to Christmas, because pregnancy takes 9 months, and that's part of it. But the Annunciation itself, it's also right after the spring equinox, which is when the day and the night are equal, and it's the first day of spring. And I'm not going to go into the symbolism of that right now, but just let your imagination go on that one. And also, the Nativity of St. John the Baptist is June 24th, which is, it's almost exactly 6 months before Christmas. That's what we can infer from Scripture, is that John the Baptist was 6 months older than Christ. Also, it's important because John the Baptist is the forerunner. He's the one that proclaims Christ and prepares the world for Christ as the last prophet in the Old Testament. And also, since it's 6 months prior to Christmas, which is around winter solstice, that means St. John the Baptist's feast day is right after the summer solstice, meaning the summer solstice is the longest day of the year. Every day after that gets a little bit darker as you approach towards Christmas. And why? Well, John the Baptist said himself, I must decrease so he may increase. Right? So it's baked into all of reality. That truth that he says in Scripture, that's what's being revealed in nature itself. And we can give so many examples of this, like the date of Easter. Easter is on the Sunday after Passover, and Passover is calculated by the first full moon after the vernal equinox, which is right around the Annunciation as well. The vernal equinox, the spring equinox, lots of symbolism there. And Ascension Day is the fourth day of Easter, Pentecost is 50 days after Easter, so on and so forth. Another brief example is Pentecost. Pentecost always falls in summer. And why is this important? Well, Pentecost is this. It's the celebration of the descent of the Holy Ghost, but also it's the apostles going from this tiny community branching out to the world. So we can think that they're going all around the world after that point in multiplicity, in great numbers, and the world starts to be converted. And summer is the time of multiplicity. All of our events, most events that we have are in the summer. Summer is when we work the fields. Summer is when we go to concerts. Summer is when we have sporting events for a lot of different sports. It's when everyone's moving about. So it's the same sort of movement culturally, regardless of culture, as it is in the feast itself. Traditionally, preparation for feasts required great fasting, such as an Advent and Lent, which also is reflective of the seasons as well, of what food people would have, and also the sort of mood that it would set for people. And so with that, I want to get into, I wrote this down, and I thought it was pretty interesting. So as icons are physical, visible signs of invisible realities fixed in space, solemnities and feasts of the year are icons pointing us to heaven fixed in time. So we can say that feasts are icons in time. So that brings me to the third point, which is living liturgical, the practical steps. So, as I said, living liturgically is uniting the liturgical calendar and the cosmic calendar in our own lives. But those are very large-scale things. Like, how do we even begin to do that? Well, one of the ways I think is very important, if we look at how people are flocking in the secular liturgies, we could say, we can infer that music is very important to the human experience. And this, I think this is crucial for a variety of reasons, but as a culture, like American culture, everyone knows kind of like pop songs and they have them memorized and stuff. But there's not a lot of overlap, so to say, with everyone. So like, if you would survey every American, they wouldn't know all those same songs. They wouldn't have those same songs memorized necessarily. But you see in more traditional cultures that they have like all these like folk songs and different dances and stuff just memorized, and they don't even. It's not even like they're like sitting down and reading a book and like figuring out how to do this. No, it's like they're just living it, which is an example we can take. So I think something that we can do as Catholics in the modern world is relearn a lot of hymns, relearn chants, and all this sorts of stuff, and bring them into our daily life. In the liturgy of the hours, the whole thing is sung. It can be sung. That's an example. But also like making Gregorian chant and Byzantine chant more prevalent once again. Or like another suggestion could be like a parish community could get together and all those people could learn carols together, like Christmas songs or whatever that are focused on that specific culture or that like in that specific language, or learning things in Latin or Greek or whatever language. And music is the art of unfolding forms in time, as painting produces forms in space. And music's highest form, just like any object, any art, any craft, any trade, it finds its perfection in the liturgy, which is to say the Mass. A simple chair becomes a cathedra in a church. A cup becomes a chalice. All these different things. Like there's so many different examples of like everyday objects that are just amplified and brought up to what they're meant to be in the liturgy. We can use like cups and things like everyday items, but what its true highest purpose is to be used in liturgy. And music is not an exception. Like its highest form is in a liturgical setting. But I also think because the seasons are very much connected to the liturgical calendar, like winter, summer, all that, I think it's important that we go closer to nature. And there's so many different ways we can do this. We're in Akron right now, and there's so many different metro parks that we can just go and walk in, but also just like simple things like going on rosary walks with people, so on and so forth. But really, getting close to nature, there are some, as well as being more liturgical, there are different things we can do simultaneously. So one of those things is that every single day we can develop a habit of reading the Mass readings. So the readings that are said in the liturgy. What you will begin to notice, and this is from my own experience, that after a year or 2 years, you'll intuitively think of a biblical story, and then literally the next day it's in the readings. Because we're built for habit. So we're going to intuitively, if you internalize all the mass readings and the propers and such, you're going to be synced up with the liturgical calendar. Now, another way we can do that in the more like nature side of things is do something as simple as planting a garden. Why? Because there's only certain vegetables and fruits you can plant in certain times. Only certain things are going to grow from the seed at very specific times of the year. They're only going to come up at certain times. If you just forget about the garden, it's like the fruit's going to be rotten. Like it forces you to be super attentive to the natural cycles, even like the weather patterns and such. And as I mentioned in the beginning, because I'm a roofer and a carpenter, I work outside and I work in the sun, that means that if it rains, I can't work. And this is very reflective of how like 90% of people live through most of history, which is they would work outdoors, such as being farmers or merchants, where you could only do things at certain times of the year. Merchants can only travel during the warmer seasons. They can't travel through the winter unless they really have something they need to get to some other place. And farmers, like, you just can't plant at certain times, and you can't harvest at other times. You can't. Just doing activities like that brings you closer to nature. So, like, if you're someone that wants to be closer to nature and you're looking for a job, like, do a job that's outdoors, like, be a farmhand, be a roofer, maybe not a roofer, but work landscaping, something. It is life-changing to have a job that is very reflective of the seasons. And another suggestion, I have a quote here from the book of Job, which is, "But ask now the beasts, and they shall teach thee, and the birds of the air, and they shall tell thee. Speak to the earth, and it shall answer thee, and the fishes of the sea shall tell. Who is ignorant that the hand of the Lord hath made all things?" So everything in nature reflects God, and it reflects the liturgy. So when we're attentive to nature, we can really begin to see how these things connect. And also, another suggestion is like reclaiming days of the week, specifically like Friday and Sunday. So you hear Christians all the time talk about like we need to like reclaim Sunday and do all this different stuff, and that's a correct intuition, I would say. Like we should work our best throughout the week to make it so we don't have to work at all on Sunday. To do what we're meant to do, which is rest and serve the Lord. And with Friday, fasting, which the church requires some form of penance or fasting on Friday of some form, like abstaining from meat on Fridays and Wednesdays and stuff like that. But also, another thing that's important to note is that it's the day itself reflects the life of Christ. It's like a singular day. So just as the sun and the length of days indicate different feasts and stuff, so too does an individual day. So when the sun rises in the morning, that is a sign just right in nature of the resurrection. God made the rising sun knowing of the resurrection. And when you get up in the morning and you pray before dawn and you watch the sun rise, it will completely change the way you see nature, how you see the liturgy, and just how you live your life. And other parts of the day that reflect Christ's life, obviously crucifixion at noon, and then the death of Christ at 3 p.m., but also the nighttime. The nighttime is, that's when Christ was in the grave. And when we sleep, that's literally a little death. Like, it's as if we're dying, and then in the morning, when the sun's about to rise, that's the resurrection. It's just so cool. So doing things throughout the day, like different prayers that bring our attention to the liturgy and the natural cycles is, I think, very important. Like Angelus, pray at 6 noon, 6 p.m., or I don't do this, but like some people traditionally would pray like 15 decades of the Rosary, 5 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon, and then 5 at night, covering all the different bases. And that's another way, because like different parts of the day are reflective of those parts of Christ's life. So just some suggestions on parish levels, communal levels, like rogation days. Rogation days they're just not practiced at all. Like a rogation day, as far as I understand it, it's a day set aside for a particular liturgy, typically a procession through farmland, blessing the farmland or blessing the vineyard, praying for a new crop. But also there's like stories of, I think there was like a story in Missouri in the 40s, like a parish did this for all the young men in the town, hoping that they would come back from World War II, and God answered their prayers, and every single one of those soldiers that was from that town came back. So it's forcing us to be more attentive to asking God for the things we need. We need food. We need people to not die all the time. So who's that in the heart? But Purgation Days and processions more generally, like there are a few parishes in our diocese that do Corpus Christi processions, like Sacred Heart in Wadsworth, as well as Mary Queen of Peace in Cleveland. Just bringing Christ to the world. That's it's our jobs. And I've seen other different practices as well that are pretty cool. So like, because we don't have too many traditions and practices that we currently practice, I think it's also important to look at those Christians that are having liturgies, such as like the Byzantines. Some Byzantines will do this practice on the Feast of the Epiphany, where the priest and all the able-bodied men of the parish will go to a body of water, like in the middle of January, and the priest will take a crucifix, a golden crucifix, and throw it into the water. And all the men have to jump into the water, and whoever gets the crucifix first and pulls it out, to reveal Christ to the world, as was done in Epiphany, that person, gets special honor for the day. And same thing in French-speaking cultures. There's the king cake, the little doll of Christ that's buried into the cake, and whoever gets the slice with the baby Jesus is king for the day. Different things like that, just to think about. And reclaiming space, putting up crucifixes in rooms, put holy water font by the door to bless yourself before you go and when you come home, have house blessings, create a home altar with icons, candles, and prayer books, so that there is a specific place in your house set apart, so that that's only for praying. So I see that with myself and other people, that a big obstacle to prayer is just we don't carve out the space or the time for it. So when we do that, it's already done for you. You can just go there and pray. And also eat as many meals as possible, sitting down at a table with others and friends and family and whatnot. And there's so many different ways, and I'd like to hear some of your ideas as well when we get to Q&A. And the one last thing I'll mention is where we live also matters. In modernity, there are a lot of unfortunate things. One of them, namely, is called suburbs, and it very much removes us from liturgical living. It removes us from the idea that Christ is the center of our lives, because there is no center in the suburbs. It's literally weighty. It's symbolic of time and decay and just the flood, destructions, whatever. Anyway, so if you're able, either move to a part of the city where you can walk to a parish, in walking distance of a parish, or if you're living in the country, or just live in the country, so that you can be closer to nature. Either way, you're close to God in one way or the other. One, you're close to God in the Eucharist, and one, you're close to God in nature. So, just don't go to the suburbs. And that's the way that we live, or the way that, living liturgically with Christ at the center of our lives is the antidote to the alienation we experience in this modern world. And that's what I've got. Like, by reimagining time, understanding the intimate, inseparable connections between the liturgy and the cosmos, as well as providing you with practical starting points on living liturgically, I hope that this stirred in you to bring the light of Christ, who's the center of our lives, to all space and all time. Glory to God. Thank you.
All right, thanks again, Max. We will have our 15-minute intermission now, and I'll get your attention when that is over. So think of your questions while you're doing whatever intermission things you do. Okay, see you in 15 minutes.
Thanks, John.
Hello, everyone. Oh my gosh, it's even louder than I thought it would be. Thanks for waiting patiently through our intermission. I think I let it run over a little bit by accident. Excuse me. Anyway, we're going to have our Q&A now. Like I said, it's slated for like 30 to 45 minutes, but really we can just go as long as you have questions for. So I'll hand the mic back to Max, and you can just, if you need the microphone, I can run it over to you, but like normally it's quiet enough in here that we can just shout our questions, so just raise your hand and Max will call on you and yell as loud as you can so everyone can hear you. All right, good, Max.
Any questions?
So, St. Maximus the Confessor has another quote, and it's Christianity is an entirely new way of being human. So, how do you think that relates to living liturgically?
That's a good question. I would say that I'd have to think about it, but I should probably give you an answer. Can you say that quote one more time?
Christianity is an entirely new way of being human.
Yeah, there's so much
To unpack there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I don't even know where to begin with that. Like, there's no other like way of living that is so united to the natural cycles of nature. Like I was explaining with how the day relates to the life of Christ, and how when God was creating the universe, He had that in mind. That the story of His life would be revealed in nature before like anyone could even possibly understand that like the sun rising has that level of significance. But it's I just don't know exactly where to go from that, because it's just there's so much to talk about. Like it, yeah. Really?
Okay. This is technically an observation, but there's also a question. You had mentioned about how, things like the sunrise, nature, and things like this, they connect us to the liturgical world in a way that's innate, but also, supernatural. It reminded me of, I felt like the first moment where I sort of was drawn to God when I actually went and worked as a farmhand. Stayed in this probably incredible old hazard trailer. It was horrible. But I woke up the first morning and just went outside and was crack of dawn. And that was this moment that I attributed to really identifying God, was being way out in the middle of nowhere and seeing the sunrise. And it's something as simple as that. And I remembered it again when I picked up this 4 a.m. adoration hour, which was awful, but it was great. It was awful but great. It was during the winter, and so the sun wasn't up yet. And I had that hour through till through to the summer. And it was different during the winter, waking up, being in adoration, having the sun come up. And so the question is, this is something that I'm thinking about, is that obviously fasting is important. We talk about this in the routine. But I've also thought that properly recognizing feast days as well, and really honoring them. It's there's this duality to it that you really can't properly appreciate one without the other. So I was wondering if you had some thoughts on really how feast days are so important to this liturgical year you're talking about.
Yeah. So I don't know if this counts as a feast day, but Advent, I think Advent even more so than Lent is easier to immerse in, because there's so many just because our culture is so focused on Christmas and Christmas alone, a little bit of Advent actually comes along with that. So I think things like the Advent wreath are very important, getting together with your family or friends and lighting that and reading the verses that are associated with those specific Sundays, when you light the new candle. It's for us. it can seem a little detached because the winter isn't as consequential to us. Let's say for pretty much anyone that lived prior to 50 years ago, Christmas was like you're going through Advent, you're fasting, because Advent used to be 6 weeks, and it would be the same fast as you would in Lent, which was vegan fast, and so no meat, no eggs, no dairy, and you're preparing for Christmas. So I think fasting is really important to prepare for feasts, and I think Advent and Lent are obviously the biggest and the most important examples of fasting, but also sometimes I attend a Byzantine liturgy, and the parishioners there, they have more of that focus on the fasting as well, because when you prepare, they have, for feast days, they have 12 days of preparation before the major feast days, which would be I believe the Dormition, as well as the Feast of St. Peter and Paul, just during the liturgical year. And I think fasting is not something you can just flip a switch unless you're given that grace to do that, because there are health concerns as well. You shouldn't just go from eating a meal or a snack every 2 hours of your life to going to not eating anything for 6 weeks. You got to work up to it. But I think the Advent and Lent, when you're fasting, it also helps deny the body, it denies the flesh. So it's not just penance, but it's also it's a spiritual tool to kind of combat demons. I don't know how else to say it, but combat the passions. I don't know if that answers your question. Cool.
Can you flesh out the sinister symbolism of the suburbs?
Sure. So, suburbs, I'll just start by saying that suburbs are extraordinarily unnatural. My coworker and I were actually talking about this today, because we don't usually work in suburbs that look like what you think of a suburb. We usually work in more neighborhood settings, and I said today that when someone is voting a suburb, they consider a lot of things, but the one thing that they don't consider is that a human is going to live in it. Because everything about the suburb, it denies our need for community. It denies that God-shaped hole in our hearts. A church is just arbitrarily placed along the line or the wavy street or whatever. There's no centers, and we need centers in physical space to remind us of centers spiritually. If God is the spiritual center of our lives, how we live physically should reflect that. And the pagans understood this as well. The temple and the marketplace were the center of the city, and this is how it was in Christendom in ancient times. The church was the first consideration. There's some, we tend to think about you start a city by you get there and then you put up a church, but that's not how ancients did it. Oftentimes what happened, whether it was pagan or Christian, there would be some tremendous spiritual experience. There'd be some encounter with angels or demons or something, and then they would build a church there. And then the city would happen. Then they would build the city. So that's definitely not a consideration in suburbs. A church is just kind of there's some Catholics moving in, and we bring that in. Trying to think what else with suburbs. Something I heard recently is that this applies to suburbs specifically, but houses more generally in how we make houses. How we make houses. So America is one of 3 countries in the world that uses imperial measurements, meaning that we use proportions to the body for our measurements, a foot, an inch, all this sorts of stuff. And until I heard this argument, I was very much pro metric system, but now I'm not, because metric system is arbitrary and it has no relation to the human experience. It has a relation to the size of the earth and whatnot, but not to the human experience. So you can go to some European cottage that's 700 years old, and it's like super tight and cramped and everything, but it's still cozy and it feels like it's lived in. And even though there's not much space for like personal activities and stuff, it's much more intimate, and you can tell that it was built with people in mind. Whereas like houses today, there's just like living rooms that are like spanning just like all the way up to the sky, like all the way down the hallway and whatnot. Like there's no, it's like you're in a warehouse or something.
Yeah, is that sort of what you're getting at with the suburb? Like there's just sort of like this endless sprawl. Like
Yeah.
it's sort of hard to define like where.
There's no borders.
And it's, yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. I've had that experience like because I work in like one of the last like urban sprawl suburbs from on the east side of Cleveland. I work in Philadelphia. And so like when you're driving down like these roads that like run along the lake, like into Cleveland, out of Cleveland, like let's say Euclid is over about like you could be driving down Euclid Avenue for 30 minutes, and you'll drive through 4 different towns. You know, it's Cleveland, you know, it's Euclid, Willoughby, Bennett, whatever. And maybe once you get outside of Cleveland, you can change towns without even realizing. Because everything just looks exactly the same.
Right.
You know? Yeah, there's no center or anything. It's just sort of like sprawling.
Right, there's no center and there's no like consideration for community. Yeah, and like that's, you'll hear a lot of like nostalgic people talk about how like the highways and like the movie Cars is like this. Like, you know, the highway a highway comes through and it basically describes a small town. It's true. It's like you create this giant highway that literally just straight apart through the mountains. Like they do, this is what's done with trains as well, and it's great for, you know, material flourishing. But at the same time, it destroys communities, and our community is a little bit more immediate than like material abundance. So, yeah.
Can you explain more about like the trades are living liturgically? A lot of people have a just perception how like in most society is that they think trades are like more looked down upon, like more of blue collar jobs are more bad and white collar good. Can you like explain why like having a trade as a job is living liturgically?
Yeah, so there's always been a sort of white collar jobs, you know, like, you know, people working in the courts, people working in like the courts of the king, and then like judicial courts and merchants and stuff. A little bit more white collar. There's always been those sorts of people. Like maybe you can consider like a priest white collar in a way. Yeah, so there's always been like sort of white collar jobs that are more like abstract and less physical. Although I'd argue the priesthood is very physical and it should be. Like, you know, priests like Padre Pio, they're very physically engaged in it. But anyways, the trades, the trades have been kind of like decoupled from art, and the modern world doesn't really understand what art is whatsoever. And you'll see this, like you'll hear like art people, like people that like go to museums and like review art and stuff, and they'll be like, I don't know, is this art? And it's like they don't even know what the word means. And like,
to be fair, you can't really tell if a lot of it is art.
right. But the thing is, prior to the modern era where there's mass production, every single trade, every single craft, which like anyone that's not a farmer, but a lot of farmers had trades as well, their craft was art. And the word art, in a way, is synonymous with trade and tradecraft and all that. So like when someone's building like because there's no chair factory, people would be like putting work into a chair and then carving it and making it very compatible to the human person because that was the chief concern. It was very focused on the human person. But living liturgically, I would also say that the trades and pretty much any profession is going to be united with the liturgical calendar because we have patrons of all different trades and professions, like St. Joseph, the worker, the carpenter, and then we have like saints for medical people and pretty much anything. We have saints that are patrons of anything. And so when we hit that day in the calendar, we're not only acknowledging the saint who's really just guiding us to Christ, but we're also acknowledging what it is that they're patronizing. And that's why we ask for their intercession for particular things, like how I found my carpentry job. I asked for the intercession of St. Joseph, and he found it for me. So, yeah, that's another way to think about it. But yeah. Does that answer your question? Yes.
So, what you just said was you prayed to St. Joseph and then you found the passion. How did that help?
How did it help?
Yeah, like how did that make you feel?
So it was one of those things that was, there were signs, I guess you could say, and, you know, from the period of like graduating college and then finding my job, it was about 5 months, and towards the end I was kind of getting a little desperate, like what am I supposed to be doing? Like, I'm definitely not supposed to be working in an office. So and I was already praying to St. Joseph, so I particularly developed a devotion in relation to finding vocation, like a job vocation, and he gave me like several signs, like very quickly, that it was supposed to be carpentry. Yeah.
Do you have any insights into how? So you brought up how like some of the major feast days in the liturgical calendar are modeled on solstices, which of course in the pagan world were observed as their own feast days. And there were all sorts of liturgical and ritual practices practiced around those days. Do you have any insight into how those like pagan ritual traditions were incorporated into the way that Christians celebrate the feast days that are near those parts of the year? If you don't, that's fine. I'm just wondering if you did.
I don't know necessarily. I feel like I know some specific rituals, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. But I know in terms of like iconography and art that there's definitely what you're talking about. Like, we tend to think that, you know, when Catholics come to a culture, they're going to destroy it or something, or just completely get rid of the pagan culture. But that's not what has been done. Like, you could go to like an ancient Christian church in Sweden, and you'll find like a Norse god painted on the door, because even though it's probably a demon, it's like a very important symbol in their culture. And you see this like in the style of art as well. Like, I really like Anglo-Saxon history and their liturgical arts. Anglo-Saxon liturgical art looks exactly like the pagan art that we have, the few that we have remaining. And you know, that's what Christianity does. That's what Christ does. He doesn't just destroy these principalities, we can say, these different religions, but like insofar as they're compatible with Catholicism, they're integrated and they become part of his domain. So that's part of like the symbolism of the ascension, is Christ is ascending in heaven partly because more and more principalities, more nations, more cultures, more peoples are being incorporated under his domain. So his domain is spanning, and as he's ascending. So, did that help?
Yeah.
There's a specific word for that called perennialism.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of.
You've been talking about how so many different aspects of the liturgical year, liturgical living are cyclical. And one thing that John brought up in referring to the suburbs being sort of just splayed out, things sort of just placed, kind of continuous without a real rhyme or reason or center to it. Would you say, you would talk about there are similarities between even pagan cultures and what we see in Christianity, but that is, both of those things are in contrast to what we have today. It almost seems like things are intentionally coincidental as opposed to cyclical. And that, days just happen, we do things on different days, and it's convenient, and our life is just sort of kind of like, as you were explaining that the physical world expresses these sorts of things, and the suburbs are small and random. Do you have any thoughts in terms of how coincidental culture is sort of contrary to physical culture?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the connection that you're implying, but just tell me if this is like with like the suburbs and stuff, and coincidental culture. It's cyclical in a way because it's vain. It's just kind of like random, wavy motion, kind of cyclical. Nothing's accomplished. Where Christianity, it has the cyclical calendar, but I don't know if this will answer your question, but the cyclical nature of Christianity is a little bit different than pagan cultures in that it's not vain. So we can think of things that just keep repeating over and over again as vain, and you might think like, well, isn't the liturgical calendar cyclical? Well, it's almost like a form of a cone or a spiral, where it's like an ascent. You just imagine a mountain, and we're kind of like going around the mountain, but we're slowly going up it. And you see this also in the Bible as well, like with, we came from the garden, we came out of the garden, and then we go to the New Jerusalem. But the New Jerusalem, it's like paradise, and you'll see some saints refer to it as the New Jerusalem as paradise, but it's like paradise with the fallen parts, which is the city, integrated. I would say a lot of things in like the coincidental culture and stuff. Like, obviously, it's not coincidental, but there is.
So you're sort of saying that, like, the cyclical nature of it is something that's kind of, you can't remove it from our human experience because that's just the way it's who we are.
Right.
The difference in your analogy of the cone or the mountain is that the things that we are doing is largely just the process itself, where, as you're explaining, that the culture, the aims of everyday life, all these other forms of sort of pagan worldview is just sort of the process itself is kind of the end, as opposed to this is something larger than ourselves, even if we don't live to reach the top of the mountain during this life, it's still part of this sign pointing towards something specific.
Right, and yes, and something I want to add to that as well is that Christianity, this whole talk has been about like time specifically. I referred to space, but that image of the mountain that I was talking about, that's not just time. It's not just us going in time around the mountain, but it's vertical space. Now, I would say in modern culture, it doesn't have space, and I can give you an example in a second. But we can think of space as being vertical. It's often symbolized by mountains, trees, people, because we're standing and it's vertical. There's an ascending motion to it. Whereas time, it's vain. It's lateral. It's not really going anywhere. It's flat. And I would say that modern culture specifically, it only exists in time symbolically. It doesn't really exist in space. And the best example I can think of is related to suburbs with cars. So when we have a car, space disappears. Like, not materially, but because we can go anywhere in a car, like we can go like 30 miles in 30 minutes or something, space stops having meaning. Because we can be anywhere where we want, when we want. Everything becomes about time. So when you're having a party or getting together with friends, people are always going to ask, like, so how long does it take to get there? They're not asking, like, is it 60 miles? Is it 30 miles? How far am I going to have to walk to get there? It's always a consideration of time. Because for those reasons that I mentioned, that were very, all technology is actually like that. It's not just cars. When you save time, you eliminate space. So you can think about like suburbs as well, with how houses are mass produced. They can be mass produced because we have such good technology, and thus space isn't really a consideration. The fact that a person is going to live in this physical space isn't a consideration. It's just about time, and time is money, because housing developers, they want to make a lot of money by getting people to live in these suburbs and stuff. So it's not, space isn't a consideration, people aren't a consideration, it's just time, which equates to resources and other stuff like that. But does it help at all?
Yeah, no, totally.
Cool.
I think it's interesting. You talked about this time thing. If you look at sort of like, in some cases more exoteric, like satanic symbolism, shows this focus on time, really the core of it. You can see this in all sorts of things, like the infinity symbol, the star red hand, etc. There's like this sort of time flow that is sort of centrally focused on everything, and everything else is sort of just there. It's not really relevant to the highest important. Yeah, not for sure.
Right, and thank you. And in biblical symbolism, anything that's kind of wavy, that looks wavy or seems wavy, like vines on a tree or like a snake, almost implicitly that has to do with time. And like I said, the ancients saw time as cyclical, but they also saw it as a force of change. They saw it as this force that makes things grow or makes things become destroyed. And like it's another way to look at Genesis specifically, because like the devil is a serpent, and here he's trying to tempt Adam and Eve, and because he's successful in tempting them, this great force of change happens. It's almost like the flood is unleashed, and like water is the perfect symbol for time, because it's what else like changes things so rapidly, like so unpredictably. Andrew?
So I'm sure you know that in the West we have an example of like especially living the first week in nature with like the rotationary mass.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if there are like any other liturgies, not just in the West, but like even in the East too, like that are like that sort of way?
Off the top of my head, I cannot think of anything. Maybe not like intentional liturgies. So prior to modern times, the only time that you have Mass outside is if you were in persecution. And the best example is like the Irish. They would have their Mass stones. Just like big stones in the middle of the wilderness, and everyone would bring the different liturgical, like the vestments of the priest and the candles and all these different things. And they would literally have Mass in nature. But that was because they didn't really have any other option. They're being persecuted. I'm trying to think of others. Like there are liturgies that aren't Mass that are associated with nature. I know like in the East there's like blessing of the waters. I think that's maybe on Epiphany or related to Epiphany. Fruit, yeah.
What if it's like during wartime and you got things out there?
Oh yeah, so that Byzantine church that I mentioned that I go to, they're actually having liturgies now because they're a Ukrainian church. It's called a molodon, which is like a specific type of liturgy, and they literally have like these ancient prayers specifically pertaining to war. It's like destroy the enemy in battle, like crush the enemy, all this kind of crazy stuff that you don't really hear in like liturgy anymore, but stuff like that, like and then praying for like peace and redemption and all this stuff. So yeah, wartime liturgies, and I'm sure they would have special liturgies related to like harvest festivals.
I kind of have a two-part question about the week in relation to the liturgy. So you talked about Wednesdays and Fridays as being traditionally like fasting days, and I know that Friday is because of that's a Christ diet. But Wednesdays, what are the reasons for fasting? I was taught like because Christ was portrayed that day, but are there other reasons traditionally?
I don't know. I was actually wondering that myself a while ago, but I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. Does anyone know?
I know the Roman fast days were Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, and it was because on Wednesday was Christ's betrayal, Friday is the Passion, and he's on Saturday. But those aren't universal either. Like there's the famous phrase, like when in Rome, do as the Romans. Like that's actually from the dialogue between Ambrose and Augustine about like the Roman fast ritual. Because like they didn't fast on Saturdays in Milan. So Ambrose was saying like, when I go to Rome, I fast on Saturdays. That's when in Rome, do as the Romans. Nobody knows that's from how. Yeah. That's actually where it's from.
I thought the Saturday fast was just like a private devotion in honor of Mary.
Well, it probably took on that significance at some point, but the origin is, this was something that like all Romans would traditionally do. Private, like the concept of private devotion is actually like kind of new. Like in the ancient world, like you had like local devotions. Like you, in an area, like there are the devotions of like those people for those times. Even, you walk 15 miles away and you have slight variations on that. Like there was a much stronger connection between place and emotional life. Which is, sort of along the lines of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
Like this sort of greater synthesis between like the personal and emotional life.
Yeah. Right, and like before saints were like formally canonized, they were often recognized by the locals as being saints, and they would have like what would be called a cult of the saints. And the church, the bishop in Rome, or whoever the metropolitan is, they would investigate the specific cult and like seeing their practice and seeing the legitimacy of the saints. And it was like devotion to saints. It wasn't like, oh, that's my personal saint. It was like, it was like the community.
Town saint.
Yeah. Any second question?
Yeah, so the second one is relating to also the week. So if you have like Thursday, or let's say Friday to Sunday, are to mock Christ's passion and resurrection. And even, I guess you could include Thursday with the Last Supper or Passover. And I guess maybe even Wednesday for Christ's betrayal that day. But then, what would Monday and Tuesday represent in relation to Christ's life? Or is it like, it is a week as a whole supposed to represent the life of Christ in life?
I don't know specifically about Monday and Tuesday. Well, Tuesday, I don't know if that has anything to do with this, but like Tuesday, like we have a Mardi Gras before Ash Wednesday in Lent. So that's one Tuesday I can think of. But Monday, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm inclined to answer the last part of your question, yes. But I don't know specifically. Maybe an interesting place to begin reflecting on that would be what happens on those days in creation.
seventh day is when God is sleeping, right? He's like for the dead. But as far as specifically how to I was reading
Yeah, so I was curious about your opinions on like mass-produced goods versus like handcrafted goods, and how that's like changed our view of time.
That's a good question. Like mass producing things, it's because it's a technological activity, it's going to have that same symbolism, which is like space and the human person disappears. And I prefer things that are handcrafted, and but I'd say like trying to make everything in our lives handcrafted, it's just not. Maybe it's doable. Like for the Amish, I'm sure it's a lot more doable because they have that infrastructure they've set up in other communities and more traditional societies. But also, like, there's another thing with handcrafted goods that's should be noted is, handcrafted goods, because it was an art to make them, and there's a lot more detail and time that went into them. It was something that was passed down generation to generation. Like you just learned what your father or mother taught you in that specific craft. And so, like, when settlers from Europe came over to the Americas, we had this pretty well documented that traditional crafts just gradually, in some areas, but very swiftly in others, just completely disappeared. Because why would you make this intricate gourd pot to make your soup in when you could just buy just a metal pot from the Europeans? So, like, I guess that's my thought on it. So it's because we live in the modern world where everything is mass-produced, we have to make a conscious choice to like learn those crafts and to like purchase those crafts and trade those crafts with other people. Yeah. Yes.
Isn't that weird, having no garden, not just grass when you're baking, something like that, like say that barrel, but planting your own garden and cooking your own food and attempting we can do all of that, very time consuming, but you're getting back to basics and not buying from China or
Yeah, like people tend to like food more when they make it, and it does have there's just some undescribable element of like when you make something for yourself and you use it and you share it with others, as opposed to just like someone else making it or someone else that you don't even know making it. Yeah, so it does require a lot of effort, but I'd say it's worth it. It's also too, like, being in the modern world, we need to remind ourselves that like the way that we live now with all this material abundance, this is not normal. This is like, it takes a ton of effort to build the infrastructure that we have to mass produce things, and I think it's a mistake to think that we're just always going to have this stuff. So building the skills to like be more like self-sustaining and community sustaining is important. Like knowing how to grow things and how to like, just all sorts of like crafts and trades and stuff. That's part of why I also wanted to be a roofer and carpenter, is because I'd be learning a skill that I could directly apply to the home. And that's exactly what we've done. So, other questions? Andrew?
You were able to, as far as like with Lent, starting in winter and ending in the spring, are you supposed there's any coincidence there?
I would say it's not a coincidence. I don't really believe in coincidences in most circumstances, if at all. So I don't know off the top of my head what the symbolism of that would be, but I think we should look at what Lent is going towards to kind of find that meaning. So Lent is going towards Easter, and Easter, as I mentioned, it's intimately connected with the spring equinox, the first day of spring. So, like as Christ resurrects from the dead, so too does nature itself. Like all the plants and all the animals come from hibernation, and the world is made new again in life, and everything rises up as the sun rises up in the sky, producing more daylight. So there's definitely that. But yeah, it's also like just a completely practical concern. Being at end of winter, there probably also wasn't a lot of food for people like left in their storehouses. So makes sense. By the way, I guess. Does that answer your question?
As in like a good time to fast?
What's that?
Well, you said, what did you say as far as practical, like because they're running out of food, that'd be a good time to fast?
Right, like I mean some people will probably do that out of necessity, but like that's not the sole reason why. I just say practically because it's not the sole reason why, but it's also the practical concern is related to nature, because if those things are united, it would make sense that in the time of death, which is winter, there would be less stuff. You know, it's dead. Everything's dead.
Well, can't get more of it.
Right, you can get more of that. Yeah. Yes?
So, during the times that we should fast, do we have to fast? Like, is it like an essential for us that's Catholics to fast?
Well, there's different ways I can answer that. Like, the church, I don't know exactly what the church recommends fasting on specific times, also because it's changed and it's become a lot more lenient in like the last 500 years with fasting. But you know, in the spiritual life, I would say that fasting is an absolute necessity in season and also out of season, especially if people are struggling with particular like passions or whatever. Because when you subdue the body by denying the body with fasting, you know, like sins of the flesh become a lot less. Like, I guess the demons, or however you want to say it, it's, you know, the body isn't, the flesh isn't going to rule over the spirit. Yeah.
Well, if you fasting when you realize without passion,
I don't remember.
oh,
It probably would have been during Lent, so in some fashion, maybe. It's a good question. One more question?
Alright. Let's give next another round of applause.